Alan Feirer is next on the list. Alan is a native of Whittikai, Wisconsin, and is a leadership trainer, speaker, and organizational development specialist with Group Dynamic. Please welcome Alan.
Thanks. Do you recommend that we take the Which Famous Philosopher Are You quiz on Facebook? This is Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia. By the way, bottom line up front, the moral of the story is always ride the ducks. There's no ducks in that picture. Peggy's Cove is about 20 miles southwest of Halifax, and I took that picture. It is that beautiful. A year and a half ago, my family and I, my wife and daughter and I, were fortunate enough to take a little vacation up to Nova Scotia, that's my daughter right there, and hung out in Halifax in the area, and we had some great seafood, and we met some wonderful people, and we learned something really interesting that we had no idea about, and that is that the largest accidental explosion ever in human history happened pretty close to where my daughter's playing with the birds right there. It happened in the narrows of Halifax Harbor, which is very important during World War I, and it happened during World War I. That's sort of an era picture before the explosion. On Thursday, December 6th, 1917, there was a bit of miscommunication between two ships in the harbor. Now, that wouldn't have been such a bad thing if it weren't for the fact that one of the ships was carrying about 3 kilotons of explosives. It's a French munitions ship called the Mont Blanc, and it was headed up the Narrows, and the Emo, a Belgian relief ship, was coming the other direction. You can see that the harbor was a very busy place during World War I because of the strategic significance. You can see that Halifax's harbor was much closer to the war than say, Boston Harbor or Fairfax in Virginia. So it was a very important location. The Canadian Navy wasn't the only one there. There were navies from all the Allied forces that were there. So that morning there was a miscommunication between the two ships, and the people there were very interested in what was going on. So they even put in the newspaper some things about if you look quick, you can see that the cargo of the Mont Blanc was sort of dangerous. So the Emo ran into the Mont Blanc at about 8:30 in the morning, and the sparks from the metal hull caused a fire to begin. The crew of the Mont Blanc evacuated immediately. They believed that the explosion was imminent. They hollered warnings to everybody they could. They took their lifeboats. They headed across the harbor. Sure, it was going to explode any moment, and they all actually survived the explosion. The crew of the Emo was not so fortunate. So the survivors went over there. Then the ship drifted across the harbor for about a half an hour. This is about 9 o'clock in the morning. Children were on their way to school. People were on their way to work. A ship was burning in the harbor. It was fascinating to see. And so people, bless you, so people lined up along to watch. And then at about 9:05 a.m., the explosion happened. You don't have time to look at all those things right there. But there was a fireball that was 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the core. That caused a 60-foot tsunami that went as far as 3 miles away. People experienced the blast in 3 ways. First, they heard the sound. The sound impact hit them. And then came the concussive, the air part of the explosion. And then the tsunami came. So some people experienced it 3 times. The windows of every single building were blown out in the entire area, an area of about 60,000 people. 1,600 people were immediately killed. Immediately killed. Broken glass flying in their faces, people were decapitated. There's a sugar refinery just on the shore, right there. There's the Emo blown across the harbor, right there. That night, there was a 16-inch snowfall blizzard. Not only that, most of the homes were heated with coal and wood, so the tremors from the explosion knocked over the coal and wood-burning stoves in the basements. So most homes that were still standing burned down. Over 25,000 people homeless. An interesting part of the tragedy was that many babies were not identified because the only people who could identify them were their mothers. Many fathers were off at war, so there were a lot of unidentified babies. Now, 30% of the people killed were children under the age of 15. So, there's a proportionate amount that were also injured in that age group. Something that we didn't understand at that time was that children were different than adults when it came to fluid balance during surgery. So most children who were operated on worldwide died because doctors didn't understand fluid balance in children. The doctor who was fighting this crusade to recognize this was in Boston, And Boston, for some reason, responded aggressively to this tragedy. They responded, they got a telegraph message, and a train went through the blizzard up to Boston with Harvard medical students, firemen, police officers, and a guy named Dr. Ladd, who was able to stay in Halifax for a long enough time to discover the right fluid balance and became the father of pediatric surgery because of the Halifax explosion. This is the governor of Massachusetts, Governor McCall. They named a temporary apartment building after him. These are all relief supplies that came from Boston. Boston just did everything they could to help them out. This is the Boston Common Christmas tree. Every single year, Nova Scotia, by law, sends a 50-foot tree to Boston in appreciation for them reaching out during the Halifax explosion. Bostonians don't even know this, but that is a tree, that is a gift every single year from the people of Nova Scotia, thanking them. The explosion stopped all the clocks in town. The town clock in Halifax stays at 9:05 as a remembrance of the tragedy. There's a piece of shrapnel in a church, always there. The anchor of the Mont Blanc was blown 2.5 miles south to a park. There it sits, unvandalized, nearly 100 years later. Nobody messes with it. Halifax has some of the friendliest people in the world because they learned and they have not forgotten that there's just some things that are just more important than anything trivial. You can jaywalk in Halifax and get away with it. I tested it, it's a lot of fun. It's a beautiful city, great seafood, amazing people, so much fun to be there. Where did we learn about the Halifax explosion? Was it in a brochure rack at the hotel? Was it in a history class? Did we run into some expert? No. We did what every tourist does in any town that's got water. We rode the ducks. Yeah. Memphis, Branson, Wisconsin Dells, they all have the ducks, these amphibious crafts. It was a 20-year-old college student from the local university who told us about the Halifax explosion until 9/11, the most fatal day on this continent. And we learned about it on the ducks. So I'm telling you, man, always ride the ducks. Thanks.